The war has long been gradually spreading to the territory of Russia. The air defense of this country has been at very low level. Ukrainian drones have long been observed over Russian territory. This time they visited the Ministry of Economic Development of the Russian Federation and destroyed one of the offices belonging to this agency. The ministry's official documents were scattered all over the neighborhood where the building is located. Hello friends, I am a Ukrainian who does not leave the territory of his country. I would like to tell you what is really happening at the front with the help of animation and the information that the Ukrainian armed forces are sending us. Support my work by liking it and also believe in our victory. Active fighting continues in all sectors of the front line. The Ukrainian armed forces have established themselves 300 meters north of the village of Priyutne Zaporizhia region. Despite the recent rains, there is still a small movement forward. Ukrainian defenders struck at the outskirts of the village where Russian positions are located, so the Russian army still remains in a certain part of the village. Nevertheless, the Ukrainian armed forces have passed the first line of Russian defense, which was considered the most fortified in the south. In the future, the offensive should go faster, because there are no minefields behind this line, which previously held back the Ukrainian army. On this front, the Ukrainian armed forces launched two major attacks in the direction of Tokmak and Berdyansk. In fact, this is how the Ukrainian forces will cut off 100 kilometers of the front, forcing the Russians to abandon their positions and simply flee. In the future, Ukrainian territories will be liberated with the help of American M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, another batch of which has arrived on Ukrainian soil. On the southern flank of the Bakhmut direction, exactly where the fighting in the village of Andriivka is taking place, the 3rd Separate Storm Brigade launched artillery strikes at the Russian army using cluster shells. For days now, the Russian army has been conducting massive counterattacks near Bakhmut in the village of Klishivka and its outskirts, aiming to drive Ukrainian troops out of the village. When the Russians launched their offensive in this area, they redeployed, but their offensive here failed. The Russians have now replenished their artillery losses, which has led to positional fighting on the part of the Ukrainian armed forces and numerous attacks by the Russian Federation. In the Liman sector, other units of the Russian airborne troops continued their offensive in Serebryansky forestry west of the village of Kremina Lugansk region in the east of the country, but did not achieve significant success. However, the Ukrainian armed forces drove the occupiers out of the village of Novoyegorivka and before that from the village of Nadia. To the west of the village of Karmazinivka, the Ukrainian armed forces are taking up new positions. The Eastern Front has now become the largest concentration point for the Russian army. The Ukrainian armed forces have pinned down more than 100,000 occupants. Their offensive on the Kupiansk direction was unsuccessful, but now the Russians cannot stop to move their forces to the south, where they are attacking the Ukrainian army. Instead, they are replenishing this area with newly minted soldiers without proper training, who are useful to the Russian army only as cannon fodder. In the Berdyansk sector, after the return Staromayorsky village from the occupiers, the Ukrainian armed forces have two more villages ahead of them to the last line of Russian defense. The occupiers are forced to retreat to the Staromlinivka area. This gives Ukrainian troops the opportunity to move further south, closer of the Sea of Azov, Mariupol and surrounding settlements. In the Avdiivka sector, the enemy conducted an airstrike in the vicinity of Nevelske. He fired at more than 10 localities with artillery. In the Mariinka sector, Ukrainian defense forces continue to hold back the Russian offensive in the vicinity of Mariinka. The enemy launched an airstrike near Krasnohorivka and shelled over 50 localities. The occupants tried to storm Mariinka with tanks and armored personnel carriers, but were defeated.